Start with two people. Same city, same year, almost the same paycheck. I want to keep them close together on purpose because the thing I am going to show you is not about talent or luck or some secret that one of them was born holding. It is about a single decision, repeated quietly, that nobody watching either of them would have noticed for a long time. Call the first one Danny. Call the second one Priya. Both of them landed jobs that paid around $60,000 when they started. Both of them got the same kind of small annual raises, the 3%, the 4%, the occasional bump when they switched roles. If you lined up their tax returns side by side across the years, you would struggle to tell them apart. The income line moves almost identically. That is the part I need you to hold on to. The inputs were nearly the same. The outcomes were not even in the same universe. Here is what Danny did, and I want to be fair to her, because what she did is the most normal thing in the world. The first real raise came through, a few $1,000s a year, and it landed in her account, and it felt like permission. Her car at the time was fine. It ran. It was a paid-off sedan with 110,000 miles on it, and a small rattle in the dashboard when the heat ran. But the raise felt like a door opening, and on the other side of that door was a lease on something newer. 400 and something a month. Not reckless, affordable by every calculator she checked. So she did it. The next raise came a year and a half later. By then, a coworker had moved into a nicer apartment, and the math on Danny's own place suddenly looked a little sad by comparison. So when her lease came up, she moved too. 200 more a month for the upgraded unit, the one with the island in the kitchen, and the gym she would use maybe 9 times. Then the lease on the car ended, and the dealership offered her something with a little more presence, a small SUV, and the payment crept up again. None of these were disasters. Each one was a reasonable response to a real raise. That is exactly why it works the way it works. Now Priya, same first raise, a few $1,000s a year. Here is the only thing she did differently, and it is so small it almost sounds like nothing. Before that raise ever touched her checking account in a way she could feel, she set up an automatic transfer that pulled most of it out on payday and sent it somewhere she did not look at. Her car at the time was a boring Toyota, the kind of car nobody compliments and nobody remembers. She kept it. When it got paid off, she kept driving it. When the dashboard light came on, she fixed the dashboard light. The car was not a statement. It was a tool that moved her body from one place to another, and she had quietly decided that was the entire job description. 5 years pass. This is the part where I have to be careful, because if I tell it wrong, it sounds like a fable, and it is not a fable. It is arithmetic. 5 years in, Danny and Priya still look almost identical from the outside. If anything, Danny looks like she is doing better. Newer car in the lot. Nicer apartment. The clothes are a little sharper. If you ran into both of them at a wedding and had to bet on which one was winning, you would bet on Danny. And you would be reading the only signals available to you. And you would be wrong, because the difference between them was never visible. It is the moment your invisible, boring surplus starts lowering how much pressure the world is able to put on you. That is the line that changes everything, and almost nobody can see you cross it, including sometimes you. Let me build the machine first, because the payoff only makes sense once you understand the parts, and the parts are aggressively ordinary. The raw material is ordinary income. I want to underline that word, ordinary. There is no inheritance in this story. Nobody's aunt died and left a building. Nobody started a business on the side that exploded. Nobody bought a coin that went up 400 times. Priya's entire engine ran on a normal salary at a normal job, the kind of income that millions of people have and assume is not enough to build anything. It was enough. It is almost always more than enough, but only if it goes through the right machine. And the machine starts with one component that does all the heavy lifting. The component is the automatic transfer, not willpower. Not discipline in the way people usually mean it, the gritted teeth, the saying no at the restaurant. Priya was not stronger than Donnie. She just arranged things so that her strength was only required once, on the day she set up the transfer, and never again. The money left her account before she had a chance to assign it a personality. You cannot feel deprived of money you never saw arrive. This is the quiet trick at the center of everything, and it is the opposite of how most people try to save. Most people try to save what is left at the end of the month, and there is never anything left at the end of the month, because money is a gas, and it expands to fill whatever container you give it. Priya gave it a smaller container on purpose, automatically, on payday, and let the rest of her spending happen freely inside what remained. Then the employer match. Her job, like a lot of jobs, would put money into her retirement account to match what she put in, up to a few % of her salary. Danny had the exact same offer. Danny meant to set it up. She got the email about it during onboarding and filed it under later, and later has a way of becoming never. Priya enrolled in the first week and contributed enough to get the full match, and I want to sit on this for a second, because it is the closest thing to free money that exists in an ordinary financial life. The match is not a return. It is not a good investment. It is a raise you have to claim, an instant doubling of part of your contribution before a single dollar has even been invested in anything. Skipping it is not neutral. Skipping it is choosing every single pay period to leave a piece of your own compensation on the table, because claiming it required one boring afternoon you never scheduled. And then the thing that makes the whole machine worth running: compounding. The money Priya sent away did not sit in a drawer. It went into broad, boring, diversified investments, and it grew, and the growth itself started growing. And the part people never feel in their gut is that this process is brutally slow at the start, and then stops being slow. For the first few years, it looks like almost nothing. Priya's account in year 2 was not impressive. If she had been checking it for a thrill, she would have quit. It looked like a savings account that was trying a little harder. The magic does not live in the early years. It lives in the back half, in the part of the curve that bends upward while you are not watching. And the only way to reach the back half is to survive the boring front half without flinching, which is exactly what the automatic transfer was designed to make her do. And I want to stay on that front half, because this is where almost everyone quits. The first year the account barely moves, the second year a little. And somewhere in there, a voice shows up that says, this is pointless, that you would barely notice the money if you spent it instead. That voice is not lying about the present. It is lying about the future. The early years are not the reward. They are the toll you pay to reach the part of the curve where the growth finally outruns your own contributions, where the account starts adding more in a good year than you put into it. Priya never saw that part coming when she started. She just kept the transfer running through the boring stretch, on faith and arithmetic, until the slow years quietly turned into the steep ones. Now the spending side, because this is where the two stories actually split, and it is more interesting than just saving more. The paid-off boring Toyota versus the finance truck. I keep coming back to the car because the car is where so much of this gets decided, and almost nobody decides it consciously. Danny's monthly payment on her vehicles across these 5 years ran somewhere around $500, sometimes more, never zero, because the moment one lease ended, another payment began. There was never a single month in 5 years where she owned her transportation outright. Priya's car cost her insurance, gas, and the occasional repair. And the repairs, even the annoying ones, even a transmission scare in year 3, never came close to what a continuous car payment costs. The boring Toyota was not a sacrifice. It was a $500 a month raise that Priya gave herself by simply refusing to participate in the upgrade cycle. Then the housing drift, and I call it drift because that is exactly how it moves, slowly and without a decision point you could name. Danny's rent climbed every time she moved, and she moved toward nicer, always, because the raise had arrived and the nicer place was now technically affordable. Priya tapped it. When her income went up, her housing did not automatically follow. She stayed in the perfectly fine apartment longer than felt natural, and when she did move, she moved sideways, to something comparable. not upward to something that ate the raise. Housing is the biggest line in almost everyone's budget, which means a capped housing cost is the single most powerful lever most people have, and the one they are least willing to touch, because where you live feels like who you are, and trading down on it feels like admitting something. And then the small stuff, which I include only because it compounds in the same direction, not because I want to give you a list of things to feel guilty about. The meals out that became a default instead of an event. The subscriptions that renew silently and serve a version of you that you stopped being 2 years ago. The purchases that happen because the friction to buy has been engineered down to a single tap. Priya did not eliminate these. She put friction back. The card was not saved in the app. The subscriptions got reviewed. The meals out stayed special by staying occasional. None of this was about denial. It was about making the easy path the cheaper path instead of the more expensive one, because whatever path is easy is the path you will actually walk. Think about what that actually looked like on an ordinary Tuesday night. Danny is tired, and the food app is one thumbprint away, and the order is placed before the tiredness even finishes forming into a decision. Priya hit the same tiredness on the same kind of night, but the card was not stored, so the app made her go find it, get up, and dig the number out of a drawer. And in those 20 seconds of friction, the craving usually lost its grip, and the leftovers in the fridge suddenly seemed fine. She did not out-discipline Danny in that moment. She just put a small wall between the impulse and the purchase, and most impulses do not survive a small wall. But the real engine, the one that matters more than every spending decision combined, was this.
Every time a raise came, Priya redirected it before her lifestyle could find it. The raise hit, and the automatic transfer scaled up to swallow most of it, and her standard of living stayed roughly flat while her income climbed.
This is the move almost nobody makes, because a raise feels like the reward for the work, and spending it feels like collecting the reward. Priya collected a different reward. She collected the gap between what she earned and what she spent, and she sent that gap to work, and the gap got wider every single year, while Danny's gap stayed at 0 or went negative. So that is the build. Ordinary income, automatic transfers, the match claimed, compounding given time, a boring car kept, housing capped, friction restored, raises redirected. No magic, no inheritance, no business, no coin. Now, let me tell you what it actually buys, because the payoff is not what most people imagine, and the gap between what it actually buys and what people think it buys is where most of the confusion in your financial life lives. Here is the first uncomfortable truth. Real wealth, the kind Priya was building, is almost completely socially invisible. There is no outward sign of it. Her account did not show up on her body or her car or her apartment. You could stand next to her in line and have no idea. And this runs exactly backward from how most people experience money, because most people are reading signals, not balances. The new car is a signal. The watch is a signal. The apartment with the island is a signal. Strangers and even friends respond to the signals, because the signals are all they can see. The balance is invisible to everyone but the person who holds it and the institution that stores it, which means the entire performance of wealth, the part that costs the most, buys you nothing but the opinion of people who are only looking at the surface anyway. And once you really absorb that the people impressed by the signals cannot see the substance, and the substance cannot be seen by anyone, you start to ask what the substance is even for. Here is the answer, and it is the most important thing I will say today. Stealth wealth changes your tolerance. That is the payoff. Not a lifestyle, a tolerance. When Priya hit the point where her invisible surplus was real, something shifted that had nothing to do with spending. She could turn down a bad deal. The job that paid a little more but came wrapped in something she could smell was wrong. She could walk away from it because she was not standing on the edge of her own finances hoping nothing went wrong. She could say no to a bad ask. The relative, the friend, the situation that wanted her to bend in a way she did not want to bend, she could decline because her security did not depend on staying in anyone's good graces. She could leave a bad room. The meeting, the relationship, the arrangement that was quietly costing her something, she could exit because the surplus underneath her meant that leaving did not threaten her survival. That is what the money actually does. It does not make you look like anything. It lowers the amount of pressure the world can apply to you. Every bad deal, every bad ask, every bad room has leverage over you in exact proportion to how much you need it not to fall apart. The boring invisible surplus quietly removes that leverage. Danny, with the nicer car and the nicer apartment and no gap underneath her, was more exposed to all of it because every signal she was paying for made her need her next paycheck more, not less. She looked like she had more options. She had fewer. Let me make that concrete because it is easy to nod at and hard to feel. Picture Priya a few years in, across from a manager offering her a role that pays more and smells wrong, where the money is clearly a payment for tolerating something. Danny, in that chair, does the math on the car payment and the rent and the gap that is not there, and says yes, and calls it ambition. Priya does the same math and answers differently, because the gap underneath her is real. She says no, without her voice shaking. That is the whole product, not a yacht, a no that costs her nothing to say. I want to be precise about the word millionaire here, because it gets used like it means a yacht and a different face, and that is not what it means. Crossing into real wealth, even 7 figures, does not look like the movies. It looks like comfort, and it looks like options. It looks like a slightly quieter nervous system. It looks like being able to absorb a surprise, the car repair, the medical bill, the lost job, without the surprise turning into a catastrophe. It is not excess. It is margin. And margin is almost impossible to photograph, which is why nobody posted, which is why you grew up thinking wealth was the excess instead of the margin. And margin does not just sit there waiting for a disaster. It changes the ordinary choices you make on a normal day, long before any emergency arrives. The job you take, the one you turn down, how long you stay in a role or an arrangement that has stopped fitting. Margin lets you wait for the right thing instead of grabbing the first thing. It lets you treat a bad week as weather instead of a verdict. Danny's choices were all quietly made for her in advance by the size of her obligations. Priya's choices stayed hers because the surplus underneath her kept the next paycheck from being the only voice in the room. 2 more distinctions because they protect everything I just said. The first, not all wealth is usable. There is a difference between the money you can actually deploy, the liquid and invested wealth that you could turn into options this month, and the money that exists only on paper, the home equity that you cannot eat. The number on a statement that you cannot touch without selling the roof over your head. Plenty of people who look wealthy on a net worth spreadsheet are land rich and cash trapped, with all their value locked in a single illiquid thing, unable to use any of it to lower a single ounce of pressure in their actual life. The wealth that changes your tolerance is the usable kind. Build that kind on purpose, and do not let a big number on an asset you can never sell fool you into thinking you have built the kind that sets you free. The second, order matters. You cannot run Priya's machine out of sequence or it breaks. First, a small emergency fund, so that the first surprise does not send you into debt and undo everything. Then the high interest debt, the credit card balances charging you more than any investment could ever return, because trying to invest while carrying that is like bailing a boat without plugging the hole. Then the employer match, because it is free and immediate. Then the long-term investing, the retirement account, and the broad, boring funds, where compounding does its slow, patient work. Run them in that order. The emergency fund protects the machine. Killing the high-interest debt stops the bleeding. The match doubles your money. The investing builds the surplus. Skip a step, and the steps after it get weaker. So come back to Danny and Priya, 5 years in, standing at that wedding where you would have bet on the wrong one. Danny is not in trouble. I want to be honest about that. She is not drowning, but she is exposed. Every month is accounted for before it arrives. The nice things are real, and so is the quiet pressure underneath them, the awareness that there is no gap, that a bad month would be a real problem, that she cannot easily say no to anything because too much depends on the next deposit landing on time. Her wealth is on the outside, where everyone can see it, and it protects her from nothing. Priya's is on the inside, where nobody can see it, and it protects her from almost everything. Same income, same 5 years. The only difference was a transfer she set up once and a refusal to let her raises become her lifestyle. And the threshold she crossed, the real one, was never the day she could have looked rich. She never bothered looking rich. It was the day her boring, invisible surplus grew large enough that the world simply could not push her around the way it used to. And the strange, quiet, almost anticlimactic truth is that this is the only financial threshold that has ever actually changed anyone's life. It is the money nobody sees. It was always the money nobody sees.